Your mother-in-law, you said, stayed at your house.
Yeah.
She lived through the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, and you don't have to do this, stop me if you don't want to do it, but take us through your husband's decision to go with your oldest boys to the peaceful march this weekend.
So the boys, because, you know, we talk about how our 16, 17-year-olds, they're seeing stuff. They saw the video. And they were so frustrated and trying to figure out how to deal with their emotions. And they were like, Mommy, did you see this? That's so messed up, and just processing so many minutes. Now, mind you, we all know this is right after Ahmaud Arbery. And they're like, oh my goodness, Mom, what's going on? So as it gets later and later in the week, and then they find out there's going to be protests in Cleveland, they were like talking to their dad, Papi, we got to go. We have to go. We encourage, and Isaiah just finished up a year of government learning about government and rights. And we encourage being vocal. This is a year where we went to the African American Museum. Oh my goodness.
Washington, right?
In Washington. I can't encourage it enough. After learning about centuries of people speaking up, Isaiah's mom mentioned, man, Isaiah, since he was little, has had a heart.
You mean Len's mom?
Yeah.
You said Isaiah's mom, and that's
I'm
so
sorry.
I was just trying to...
Len's
okay.
mom has been saying, you can't not take him. Isaiah, since he was little, has been talking about his heart for civil rights, his heart for ministry, his heart for, like, Martin Luther King. And so I'll talk about that part more, but he was just like, Papi, we have to do something. And so Len on Friday was like, I can't take the boys.
And what was his reasoning? Because I think it's legitimate. It's not like he isn't passionate about this.
Now, Friday on the phone, he was like, man, he was telling me on the phone, I'm going to Minnesota. I'm going to protest in Minnesota. So when he's talking to the boys, like, I don't know, and I pulled him aside. I was like, weren't you the one talking about you going to Minnesota? He was like, yeah, no, but we're talking about my son.
Yeah, he's worried about his sons.
This. Yeah. He was just like, I don't know if it's safe. I don't know if I should do this.
And I think that's the heart of a father who loves his sons.
Yeah. And so it's easy throughout the years, as we've been going. We went to the museum in Cincinnati. There was a moment where Isaiah's like sitting, I got a picture, sitting in front of the river and telling me, Mommy, do you know how many people just swam through that river? Like, we know this, and in our minds we've encouraged it. But now it's like, take me. And he's like, dude, I don't know. These are my sons. So that's where I was like, of all weekends, for Len's mom, who is the number one to be like, this is my baby, and stay home, and, you know, it's dangerous.
Because he's a mama's boy.
He is a mama's boy.
And I can say that because I am one. So.
Len's mom loves, like, he is still her baby, and she loves my sons. And she surprised me. She walked into the house when Len picked them up. She walked into the house. She's like, yeah, they need to go. And I was like, what? Mom, you're the main one. She's like, they need to go. She said, I'm not even going to be here when they live through the results and ramifications of what's going to happen this weekend. She says, this is about Isaiah and his kids. And she was like, he's going to live through what's going on. But what was most powerful is she said, Isaiah's 17. And in a couple of years, he's going to be able to go without us. And she said, he needs to help him navigate the decisions. And what do you do when you're there?
How do you act?
Yes. How do you act? How do you stay out of trouble? How do you keep your antennas? She comes, and then when they came back, I asked her, do you still think they should have gone? And she was like, yeah, it's a life lesson. And Isaiah said, when he was trying to convince Len on Friday, he was like, our generation has been looking at the civil rights movement, saying, man, we wish we were there. Man, we wish we were there. And he was like, Papi, this is the weekend. I don't want to be 30, 40 years old telling my kids about this and then having them ask, so did you go? And to be like, well, no, I stayed in my house. You know? And that was like a tension for Len, because he's like, man. So it was just comforting to have Len's mom say, no, they need to be there. It's their right to be there and speak up.
And then Len is the right guy, I think, to help him. Like, he's hyper vigilant.
Yeah. Oh,
and he's conscientious, and so he's the right guy to help show your sons what it looks like to have your scripture firmly in your hand and love for Christ.
Yes.
And behave in a way that honors him while also expressing your First Amendment rights.
If you see, they actually made it on the news. I'll share. They made it on the news. And so Len has his RZIM shirt on, his sweater on. It's the Christ and Culture sweater on. But what was so amazing on all of this was on Friday, the friend that Isaiah has that I mentioned before, he's a white friend. He's very wealthy. He lives in Shaker. Does not have to worry about none of this stuff or care. And throughout the years has been asking Isaiah questions. And how does racism impact you? And how can I help you? And, and so he texted Isaiah on Friday and was like, man, I am so sorry about what's going on in the country, which is something that adults can't figure out how to do. This dude is like 17. I'm so sorry. He said, let me know if there's anything I can do for you or your family. So I was like, okay, cool. So I texted Isaiah links on things that white people that want to help can do and things they can read and then books they can read. And then this came up with the protest. And so Isaiah texted him and was like, my dad and I are going to Cleveland. Do you want to come? And he was like, yeah. His parents, which have been involved with because we invited him to church one time. His parents said, fine, he can go. And so Len was telling me, he was kind of explaining to the boys about, first they said everything, they got there early, thank God. Everything that happened, and they were kind of chanting, no justice, no peace, and how his friend was engaging in all of that. It finished up with prayer, and then the dynamics that happened after. But it was cool for that white boy to experience that with Len and how Len was helping them kind of like see and navigate that. Part of the precautions that Len took as he was trying to figure out how to stay safe was he took the F-150 and told the boys, you got to bring your bikes, we're going in bikes. And of course the masks, which the movement provided masks, but they stayed on the outskirts and just saying, if anything happens, you just kind of ride your bike and get out and leave. So, but I asked him when he came back, would you have done it over again? And he was like, yeah, I'm glad we went. It was, of course, you got to be mindful and stay safe, but Isaiah and his grandmother, the conversation was, oh my goodness, this is like a life experience I can look back on. In terms of an active way to express your First Amendment right for something that you feel passionate about. Isaiah was like, to watch that video of that man being killed and be here at home, like not knowing, what do I do with the emotions I feel? He felt like it was a right channel for him to say, I did something.
Yeah. They
were very encouraged to see the diversity in the group. Lots of white people there helping and crying out for justice. And Len said he saw some old elderly that could barely walk, and just kind of just walking with the group, and young kids, white and black young kids with their parents. So that was very encouraging.
A lot of comments coming in. So glad all of you are here. Janelle, thanks for sharing that experience. It's kind of a good starter for this.
Patricia said, I stayed in the house, continued to shelter in place. Oh, yeah. Hey, that's good. That's what Len's mom did.
Yeah.
Hi, Danella. Hi, Deborah. Good morning. Betty. Buenos dias. My friend Theola's on. Good morning, hey, Theola. Stacy says, hi, guys. I've had some dialogue with my African-American friends during the workday. The thing I've been faced with is privilege. It's harsh for a soft heart like mine, but it's eye-opening.
Yeah,
what do you find harsh as a white man in that word? Harsh.
Harsh in that it's a harsh reality to confront, and it's shocking, and you experience a whole slew of emotions as you begin to unpack it. When you realize it's not necessarily a personal thing, and yet it is. It's primarily a cultural thing, and yet you're part of it. It's harsh. It's hard to describe. I think that's a fair word to use.
Yeah.
But, I mean, whatever emotion you feel with it, I think it's good because it's showing you're processing. The only one I wouldn't be happy with is a person going, no, that's stupid, there's no such thing, you're lying. I mean, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Nor is it biblical for that matter.
Kathy says, this whole thing makes me sick. I don't even know what to say without digging myself into trouble. I think we all need to talk about it, but it's tense.
Yeah. And oftentimes, Kathy, the least safe place to talk about it and have a discussion is social media.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have
That's
seen.
a good point.
Yeah, it's almost better had somewhere else or in a forum like this. I mean, if somebody wants to jump in here and be crazy, that's fine. We'll talk to them too. But I said earlier, and I'm going to post this on my page, but I feel that we are not, as followers of Jesus, we're not people who take sides because we've already chosen one. We're on the side of righteousness through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so we're going to, when we stay true to the gospel, we're going to hold parallel ideas that don't seem right to people who want to force us onto a side.
Yeah.
We in one breath will praise police who do their work well and talk about honoring government authority, and in the same breath say we condemn police violence and brutality and racism. And we see those as not contradictory, but as clearly both parallel and biblical. We are, you know what I mean? Like, we have to sit in this place where it's not comfortable. It's Jesus' side. It's not comfortable there. Look it up. He said, if you are in me, you will be persecuted. So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is not surprising it's going to be that way, but I feel your pain, Kathy. I know, I agree.
Betty says, my nephew, early 20s, who recently moved to Cleveland, lives downtown, is crushed. In Youngstown, there was a peaceful protest until another group went down and were destructive.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned another group. My frustration is, as people have expressed their frustration with riots, I've shared my parents were small business owners. It's messed up what's going on with the riots, and it's...
You should show that video. It's fascinating.
About the Antifa?
Yeah.
So when my husband and my sons went, they're frustrated too, because they're like, wait, hold up, we were there. Like, it didn't start off like this. And they said it was like a couple thousand people marching around, like through the different streets, even
safely,
through public
respectfully.
square, safely chanting no justice, no peace, and all of this. And then they came back around and finished off with a prayer. The only thing that Len says he thinks would have helped is that there wasn't clear leadership. There was leadership, but the sound thing, what do you call that thing? The thing?
The bullhorn?
Bullhorn, whatever they used to speak out, or it wasn't mics, it was something else, wasn't loud enough. They had it, but it wasn't loud enough. So it made it more difficult for the group to stay together, especially toward the end. And so when they came back around and that group came, it was like 3:30, 3:45, so close to 2 hours later. The main group was like, come this way, trying to keep the rest of the main part of the group, like 95% of the group, away from all of the chaos that happened. But yeah, I one of my friends was like, yes, protesters does not equal rioters. Two different groups. So I wanted to show you toward that end what my son saw. And in the beginning, when they didn't know, now we know who they are. Isaiah was like, Papi, who are they? They were like right in front of them. Look, they look like ninjas. And Len was like, be quiet, boy. They're not ninjas.
There's no ninjas here.
And Isaiah said he noticed somebody walked up to the group and was like, hey, guys, what is that flag? What is that flag? Nope. The people around didn't know. And so this is the group I'm talking about. If you notice that group, I'll play it again. They have black clothes on with black face coverings.
And then that flag.
And then the flag. When they came home and started hearing what's happening in other cities like Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, leaders confirmed it. Pittsburgh police chief was calling out this group. We looked up the flag and it's Antifa, the Antifa flag. The Pittsburgh police chief came out and was like calling out the Antifa group, and saying that they're going into protests and causing issues and inciting violence and destruction. So that was very frustrating for them because there was valid, peaceful protest. Somebody said to pass on the resources that I shared with my friend's son. I could share it here. I'll make sure it's fine. I'll definitely share it My Facebook page, Janelle Nevels. It's links, it's books. One of them, The Color Compromise by, what's his name?
Jamar Tisby.
Jamar Tisby, and several. Because there are people, like my son's friend, he knows enough to say, how can I help, and what does it look like, and what's your experience? But he's like, I don't know how to help. What do I do? So there are people that have great hearts that just don't know, and we're inviting you. Like, it is awkward, like Kathy said. I don't know how to express myself. I don't want to get in trouble. Find a safe person that you can say, how do I engage? How do I learn more? How can I help? So I'll share those resources.
I actually liked Pastor Tanks' comments today, where he
yeah.
was outraged at systemic injustice and racism and outraged about rioting and looting.
Absolutely.
He was outraged about both.
Yes.
And in our society, that sounds contradictory because you're supposed to hate one or the other.
Yeah.
As a Christian, I think you can comfortably hate both. Although what's interesting, all of our guests today, if you noticed, they didn't even want to bring attention to the looting and rioting.
What do you do with that? Because it's painful and it's messed up what's happening with the looting and rioting.
Oh, it is. In fact, the cupcake store downtown, I read about what happened to them. Oh my goodness, how horrifying. How horrifying. They were hiding in the bathroom as people went in.
They were in there, oh my
and
God.
Smashed up the place, took all their cupcakes. It's terrible. It'll destroy that business in some respects. Other businesses downtown the same way. I think perhaps the reason some of our guests, I'd have to ask them individually, but I think some of the reasons they lean towards talking more about racism and injustice is that there's very few people who would need help understanding that rioting and looting is unbiblical. Like, I don't know of anyone who's saying it's a good idea.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of tension and lack of agreement about systemic racism. And so I think they're leaning towards the one that needs more attention because it's less believed.
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah.
But we didn't coach if you listen to our show today, we didn't coach any of our guests. We just said we want you to come on tomorrow and talk about what's happened over the weekend.
Yeah.
We didn't know what they were going to say.
Yeah.
We didn't ask them to say anything in particular. We said, how's the Lord leading you? And we really saw a consistent thread. That was encouraging to me, I thought.
Leonard says there was leadership there. There were 5 bullhorns. They're dispersed around the crowd, so have crowd control. Yeah, when Len was there, I don't know. Bethan says hello. She says Youngstown had a very peaceful and prayerful march. Then another group came in, but from what I understand, the leaders of the peaceful march wouldn't allow them to destroy anything downtown.
I love seeing that stuff, Beth Ann, and Pastor Tanks, you could speak to this. He was doing the same thing. I saw a video of him at 1 a.m. with a group of men patrolling their neighborhood streets to make sure nobody was going to break anything in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps that's where this has to turn, is that as risky as it is, it's people of God, people of faith, who are clear about their objection to injustice, can also be the ones to make sure that businesses are protected.
Yes.
And that people aren't hurt.
Especially people with muscles like Tanks.
I thought you were going to say like me.
You can't do that. We got to give you the mic. We'll be like, you stand over there.
I'm the guy that stands next to Tanks and goes, this is my guy right here.
Yes.
He's going to punch you.
Teresa says, my daughter said that she was protected by lines of white people at the protest. She said that she has never seen that many white people yelling Black Lives Matter. Oh, yes. That's what my son said. There was much diversity, and she was amazed at the show of support. Yes.
Wow. Isn't that great, Teresa?
So awesome.
That's
and
great.
For our young kids to see that. Oh, I love that. Miss Anita says, Janelle, so glad you took them. I remember my parents taking me to downtown Columbus protests during the Civil Rights Movement. Our entire historically Black church was often in attendance. The experience has had a lasting impact on my life choices. Today's show was beautiful. Thank you all for what you do. Praying for the entire WCRF team.
Thanks, Miss First Lady.
Carol says, thank you for a great discussion this morning. It was great. 3 hours.
Oh, wow, Carol, you're with us the whole time.
Cool.
Thank you for that. That's super nice.
Teresa says, I marched in the Rodney King protest in college, Kent State. Yesterday, my daughter participated in a protest in Long Beach, California. It's been 30 years and nothing has changed.
Yeah. I think we've reached a stalemate of sorts, a stagnation that's been carrying on for decades. that it's hard because it's nuanced and it's not so easy to point at because there aren't signs up anymore that say
Yeah.
colored drinking fountain
Yeah.
or no colored people allowed. And no one's yelling the N-word much. Still some, but not at people in a derogatory sense. I think it's harder to see.
It's harder to see. I've had experiences, or people in my family have had experiences with police, and when we've shared it, first the hesitation to share it publicly. Then when I've seen it talked about in certain neighborhoods, I think it's hard to see because when you engage, you know what's happening to you. When we engage, we know what's happening. Until it's filmed and shared and like, you know, like you don't see it unless somebody says, let's play the video. You know, so it's like, that's, you know what I thought about when I was at the gas station? That's the new weapon in this civil rights fight. It's the smartphone. It's that video. And so if you want to help, and I don't know if this is too radical, but it's like, dude, I love when I see white people. Like I saw a video where a white guy was driving past the guy that got stopped, and he was like, yo, are you good? And kind of like checking, you know, like it's almost that. You got to do that. Are you willing to press that button and record for people? You know, but I don't know. Maybe if that's not your calling, don't do that. But that's been what's made the difference today. Amora said, it is uncomfortable because Sunday mornings are still the most segregated places there is. So evidently we still have more room to grow.
Yeah.
That one, though, you've said it's okay for people to fellowship with people that look like them. People have different styles of worship.
I think that your church community ought to reflect, a healthy church community should reflect the healthy diversity in which they live. So, for example, if you're in a real rural part of Northeast Ohio, and like 99% of the population is Caucasian,
Yeah.
you shouldn't feel guilty that your church is. But if you're living in a community that's, let's say, primarily Latino, and you've got only white people there,
Yeah.
I don't know that you're in a healthy way reflecting your community. That's all I'm saying is that, or for that matter, if you're in a 99% black neighborhood and your church is 99% black, you shouldn't feel guilty for not being diverse. I think you're in a healthy way reflecting your community. That's kind of where I take that. I'm not the authority on the issue, but I just think we have to be cautious not to make a blanket statement that diversity is the ideal, even when it doesn't exist in your community.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't have to feel guilty, right?
Yeah.
Don says, I feel I need to call you out, Janelle. You said before your break that in the Facebook Live we will lament on the death of George Floyd. I admit I did miss your radio show, but was there any lamenting for the thousands of lives changed because of the violence across the country? Yeah, we called out rioting several times throughout the 3 hours, and I shared how my parents were small business owners and how devastating that is and sinful and evil it is to destroy small businesses. So we did call it out.
And you know, Don, I'm glad you're here, brother. I was very clear. I even said it a few minutes ago that we don't take sides in this. We stand for the side of righteousness through Christ, which condemns looting and rioting and condemns systemic racism. My question for you, dear brother, is why did you assume the worst in us? That we wouldn't condemn that? Why did you assume the worst in my friend Janelle? That she wouldn't be heartbroken over the thousands of people injured and hurt during rioting and looting? I'd love to hear your answer to that. Because I don't know what it would be, but I'd love to know.
Isaac says, the hardest thing I keep seeing is everyone posting that MLK protested peacefully and changed the world. And I agree he made a change, but obviously we have not changed enough.
Well, yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. is dead because he was killed.
And he did it peacefully. And he was put in jail several times.
He wrote one of his most important works while sitting in a jail cell, not allowed to have paper.
While doing it peacefully. Lori says the sheriff in Flint, Michigan, actually walked with the protesters. I love that picture. There was so much damage done. People were calm. I have never been in a protest since. Usually I'm working.
Yeah, and you know, some people aren't able to attend those kind of things. Yeah, and yeah, I'm also wondering why. It's a good point, Pastor Tanks. I'm seeing your comment. My friend, it was a Don? Why did you only call out Janelle? Why not call me out? We're colleagues here and we speak with one voice. So I don't know why you wouldn't call us both out.
Yeah. Yeah. Eva says, I also love to see the group of black men protecting the officer that was separated from his team. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
There is love on both sides despite the horrible behavior that took place.
That's right, Eva.
I love that.
Absolutely. You should see, I wish you all could go see the videos from Pastor Tanks.
Yeah.
Where him and his friends were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
They were grabbing people who were
Yep.
trying to go cause problems.
Yep.
And begging them to stop.
Kathy says, we just need to see each other as children of God. JP says, living in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago.
That's my friend JP, yeah.
Oh, yeah? He was out there seeing it live. It was crazy and overwhelming spiritually. Man, I can't express it. We need long-term support, not a special meeting nor event. We need people coming out on a regular basis, if not moving here.
Yeah,
Wow.
my friend JP in Chicago, right in the heat of things there. Hope you and Sathira and your kids are doing well, brother.
So what do you make of people around the world? Like in Europe? George Floyd? That surprised me. Maybe you were just like, well, yeah, of course.
Well, I mean, America's historic problem with racism is no secret to the world. It's one of the scars of our history. Now, don't get me wrong, I love America. I think it's the greatest country on earth. But it's no one's surprised to see we still have a problem with race.
Yeah, but to the march, it's some serious marching in London.
Well, you remember, Great Britain may have been behind the times on what it means to have a democratic republic and have people in control and freedom, but they were ahead of the curve in abolishing slavery. They beat us to it. William Wilberforce led Great Britain over his entire life towards the abolition of slavery in their country, and there's a significant British. I don't know what they call themselves. You know, we say African American. I don't know what they call, but there's a significant number of black British people.
Yes, yeah.
Who still care about those issues.
Yes. That's cool. Lori says she remembers the Huff riots in the 60s. Mayor Carl Stokes walked the streets trying to calm everyone.
Wow.
That's awesome. Robert Finn, he says the plight and fight of African Americans has always influenced other nations.
Yeah.
Eva says racism is not just in America. That's the truth.
No, that's so the truth. Janelle's talked at length about how you see it in Latin America.
Oh,
you see it. I've talked at length about how you see it in Asia. You'll see it in Europe. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's a human problem because if we follow Christ, we believe that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? And we need a Savior through Jesus. And if that's the case, no question, racism is a sin. And so, of course, humanity is victim of it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's everywhere because people are human and sinful, and racism's a sin.
Yeah.
You'll see it everywhere.
Ayanda, my friend,
TK,
says, Janelle, the global response is addressing racism and the effects of colonialism. The protests in London are also challenging the Windrush movement and racism in the UK.
Yeah.
Wow. What's the Windrush movement?
I don't know much about it, Ayanda. You should send us some links if you don't mind posting a link to some good info on that. I'm not too familiar with that one. Would love to see more.
Isaac says, I also want to say I was very impressed with the Mount Eaton Police Department, a small town near me. One of their officers posted something horrible on Facebook. The department found out about it and fired him 2 hours later. It gives me hope that there's still people willing to stand up for what's right, no matter what it looks like.
Yeah, there were officers all around the country.
You see the one in Tennessee?
Yeah, where he took his helmet off and he walked in the crowd and he said, you know, we're with you. We just want you to know we love you over there. And they're like, hey, march with us. And he was like, okay.
Yeah.
And it was a parade.
Yeah. There's one in Tennessee. He was
that's
a
not the one
sheriff.
you're talking about.
He's white, and he came out and he was like, if you're a police officer in my department
Yeah.
and you don't see a problem with the George Floyd video, hand your badges in and get out. Oh my goodness. Whether or not anybody does that, that's a statement as a leader. That's courage.
Yeah.
Oh, love
And that's
that.
where I almost like that all of our guests on the show today kept redirecting us to the sin issue at hand and righteousness. Because there are so many positive things to look for, and there's so many people who would like to distract us from the issues at hand.
Yeah.
And they want to paint law enforcement all into a picture of
Right.
being horrible when we see great examples of police chiefs and officers who are agreeing that there's a problem that has to be fixed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And praise them for that. I mean, that's fantastic.
That is awesome, and we should highlight that much more. Hope, change is continual, ever growing, ever developing for the better. Striving for perfection.
That should be our heart's disposition, right? Yeah.
Do you think this is it? This is the trigger for our generation? Is this the Emmett Till of the 21st century?
I don't know. I wanted it to be with many of the other situations.
Yeah.
Was it just 2 weeks ago? The guy shot jogging?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Didn't we all say, well, this is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I feel something different in this, but I really think the most effective way to bring about the change is to follow the example of the civil rights movement. And the civil rights movement, as you look at it historically, the history books won't paint it this way, but this is what it was. If you look at almost every one of the effective leaders of the civil rights movement, they had a reverend at the beginning of their name. It was a movement of the black church that rescued America from segregation and Jim Crow. When you research what took place at many of the most famous marches, they actually started in a church with prayer, worship, and communion, and then spilled out into the streets in peaceful protest. It really needs to be a movement of the church. And that in that time, it was a movement of the African American church. I think now it has to be a movement of the church collective.
Oh, yeah.
Crossing racial lines, Latino churches, white churches. That's how we'll see any sort of systemic changes, when God's people show people the path to it, which is one that stands for injustice and loves peace and makes peace. It's both. Yeah.
Yeah. Brittany says, we need revival. Our world is screaming for truth and they don't even realize it. Eva says, the police support of the protest literally had me in tears. I hope it continues.
Yeah, me too. And you know, Brittany, I'm with you on that. And think of the revival that could come about if we lead as a collective church and we don't wait for just the black church to do something about it in this season. If we all do something, I think that's where revival is born out of. When we show people what biblical justice and love and peace look like.
Yeah. Deborah says, the Emmett Till of our generation is a very interesting comparison. Yeah, I thought of that because it's that video. Remember his mom, when they asked her about the casket and she said, no, leave it open. They need to see this. And then to find, when my sons and I were studying that, and they told of people up north, where they were like, that's what's going on in the South. Like, you didn't even know. It took them seeing, this is what's happening. Look at my son. That's what that video is doing. It's one thing to hear about it. It's another thing to look for 8 minutes while people are yelling out. That's very much an Emmett Till shock of an open casket, you know? So I'm hoping that we don't, as disturbing as it is, that we don't let that go. I know we want to erase that, but that may be what it's like, dude, we can't live like this. You know, what may make it not an option to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it is a really interesting comparison because there's so many incidents in the civil rights movement, but that one truly may have been the one that tipped the scale. So may it be so.
Sarah, Brian, I agree with you about it being the black church that led that movement. Sadly, it seems as though the white church didn't meet them in their need and move to truly make amends and restitutions. It is time for us to work together.
Yeah, when you look at the history of it, it's actually pretty startling because while there were wherever they would have been, organizations like the National Association of Evangelicals, who has since said it was the wrong thing to do, took a neutral position.
Wow.
And many churches, in fact, if you look at the history of the letter from a Birmingham jail, so Dr. King wrote that letter in a Birmingham jail in response to an editorial he read in the Birmingham newspaper. It was in a prison cell, and it was from 7 faith leaders in Birmingham, 1 rabbi and 6 pastors, all of them white, telling him to leave.
Wow.
And to stop protesting and that he needs to just calm down and knock it off. That's the message that was sent then, which is why I say it truly was a movement of the black church, because historically that's what it was.
But to be fair, there were black churches that were like, yo, he needs to calm down.
Oh,
You're
of course, yeah.
Feathers, you need to
in
stop.
fact, for much of the civil rights movement, he was not seen as a leader. It was till much later, and then ultimately in hindsight that he became truly the leader of the cause.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sadly that's what it was. But I've heard a lot of African Americans say, listen, the black church can't do this time.
Yeah. Yes.
They can, but not without you.
No. Oh.
We can't go to the next layer of biblical, godly change in society without more of a collective God's people.
Yeah. Rhonda says, yes, it started in the church with MLK also leading. Who are the leaders for our day? Do we need a leader? I was going to ask you that earlier. Do you think it's going to, some people have been saying it's a cause without a leader sometimes. I mean, right now. Is that something that needs, a space that needs to be filled?
I don't know. It's a weird thing because we live in a society where there really isn't room for one voice, because back in the civil rights movement, you could have one voice because it was the letter to the editor, the person that the press covered. But now with social media, it's like we have a voice.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, and you were talking about that, how the smartphone may be the, what did you call it? You said
the weapon of this generation against racial injustice.
And so I wonder if it won't be a singular leader, if it will be the church. Right?
Which is like, it feels more biblical to me. But God had leaders. What I'm saying is, at least, at the very least, the unity of the church. We need to stop doing this whole black church, white church. To the world, against racial injustice, we need to present ourselves as the church.
Yeah, and I think we're moving that way. If you think about Time Magazine's People of the Year, and I'm not talking about this year, but when we've talked about those kind of things, there's been a number of years where it's not one person, it's like a group.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's so true.
And it's almost that's what this movement would need.
It is so true. Kathy says, we never talked about civil rights in my house growing up in New England. That was a Southern thing. We were better. I was a kid, so I didn't know any better.
Yeah. No, Kathy, my parents' experience in the suburbs of all places, no, not in the suburbs in Minneapolis, as kids would be a very similar experience.
Mammy Till actually also had that. There's a quote about her that said, before my son went down south, she was like, I thought racism was like, oh, that's a Southern thing, or at least the brutality. And she said, until it hit home. And then she realized injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
But that's where we have the unique message that racism is sin. And the antidote to sin is Christ.
Yeah.
And he's going to call us to do the works of the gospel in our lives today to make the world a better place, and to proclaim him as Savior for sin, and to call people to repentance for sin, like sin of racism. We could go on all day long on this.
Yeah, we got to go.
It's been a little long, but we're passionate about this. Don, I know we didn't hear from you, the response. I love you, man. Really, I would love to dialogue with you on this. You could send me an email, brianandjanelle@moody.edu. You could also private message our Facebook page. I'd love to talk with you on this. Honestly, I think dialogue's the best way on these things. So.
Yeah,